Why was the mainstream media so reluctant, it seemed to me, to go much, much harder on what everyone was seeing with their own eyes?
Well, look, I sit here and I'll defend a little bit of this in that I would argue the reason people were able to come to their own conclusion on Joe Biden is because of the media coverage. You know, look, we were subtle. He's using the back staircase. He's not using the front staircase. Hey, he's not doing any plenty of individual people questioning whether he should run. I certainly questioned whether he should run. You didn't understand, you know, there were some of that. But I understand the argument about the collective on that front. The only thing I can chalk it up to is this, whatever you want to call it, this fear that some members of the media had sometimes that they would be perceived as helping Trump if they somehow diminished Biden, right? That it was some sort of zero-sum game. And I think this has been the fundamental mistake that many members of the traditional press have done.
Over 1 month later.
This is not a media failure. This is a failure of the Democratic Party. And I just sort of the virtue signaling that some people have done to try to say that the media missed this story. They didn't miss this story. No. David Ignatius wrote, I just refuse to accept this stupid premise because it's a right-wing, manufactured right-wing premise in order to stain the media. The media's got plenty of things to attack them for, and there are MSNBC and CNN and pundits that absolutely carried water for Joe Biden, but they're not journalists. They're former strategists that carried water for Joe Biden. The journalist, David Ignatius, wrote a very high-profile column in October of 23 saying, is he really running again? This doesn't seem like a good idea. People like me were promoting Dean Phillips's campaign because he was running
Wall Street Journal did a bunch of coverage.
Sense. So it's not like this. This isn't WMDs where the White House worked with the mainstream media to manufacture a story that did not exist. That was a press failure, massive press failure. This was not that failure. This is an attempt by some to virtue signal, and it's this horrible sort of pitting different news organizations against each other when ultimately the people at fault are Chuck Schumer, Nancy Pelosi, Jill Biden, Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, every elected member of Congress.
Boy. So we got to talk about the mainstream liberal media because the reporters, the propagandists, they are upset, right? They're really upset because people are now rightfully criticizing the media for covering up Joe Biden's mental decline, okay? Because these are the same people who are now rewarding themselves, okay? They're giving themselves awards after telling the American people that Joe Biden was not mentally declining, that everything that we were saying, Joe Biden getting lost on stage with Barack Obama and around world leaders talking about meeting with dead people, that was all fake, right? That was all right-wing propaganda and conspiracy theories that what you were seeing were cheap fakes, right? And they told the world that there was nothing wrong with Joe Biden, just for Joe Biden to eventually drop out of the presidential race because his mental decline was so apparent that they couldn't lie about it anymore with a straight face, okay? And now they're coming out, now that President Trump is in office, and they're trying to make money. They're trying to grift off of kicking a dead horse, Joe Biden, while he's down, right? And coming out and saying, yeah, you guys are right. The right-wing conspiracy theories was 100% correct. Joe Biden was mentally declining. But, you know, hey, it's not our fault. It's actually the Democrat Party's fault, right? They're the ones that are responsible for the cover-up, not us, not us. In fact, we deserve an award for calling out the Democrat Party and their lies when it's completely and totally too late, right? When it doesn't matter anymore, we deserve an award for it. And that's essentially what the liberal media did at the White House Correspondents' Dinner.
The Aldo Beckman Award for Overall Excellence is named for a past president of the association, the late Chicago Tribune Washington correspondent Aldo Beckman. The award was established in 1981 to recognize a correspondent who personifies the journalistic excellence and personal qualities of Aldo Beckman: impartiality, integrity, and a deep knowledge of the presidency. The award also includes a prize of $2,500. This year's award goes to Alex Thompson of Axios. The judges said Thompson's aggressive reporting on President Biden, especially leading up to and after the Trump-Biden debate, revealed the president's cognitive decline was impacting his ability to do his job, information the White House tried to conceal. Ladies and gentlemen, the White House Correspondents Association is pleased to give the Aldo Beckman Award to Alex Thompson.
President Biden's decline and its cover-up by the people around him is a reminder that every White House, regardless of party, is capable of deception. But being truth tellers also means telling the truth about ourselves. We, myself included, missed a lot of this story, and some people trust us less because of it. We bear some responsibility for faith in the media being at such lows. I say this because acknowledging errors builds trust, and being defensive about them further erodes it. We should have done better. I believe our mission is vital in a world where people are struggling to figure out what's true, and people with power are not telling the truth.
Yeah, so again, I want you guys to understand just how ridiculous the mainstream liberal media is when it comes to this. Instead of just telling the truth about how they lied, right? They were complicit in the cover-up of Joe Biden's mental condition because they were. No, they're just trying to blame the Democrats. They're saying, no, it's the Democrats' fault, right? And we actually deserve an award because we came out and admitted that Joe Biden was mentally declining when it was too late, right? Don't blame us, blame the Democrats, okay? But yet you have the same people who are boo-hoo-whining and crying about some of the backlash the media is getting for the obvious cover-up. People like Chuck Todd, who was basically fired from NBC. He is upset, right? He's upset about the criticism that the media is getting, as you guys saw at the beginning of this video, when it comes to the cover-up of Joe Biden. But yet, when Chuck Todd had an opportunity to speak out and to say, hey, there's a cover-up going on here, right, that there are real reasons to believe that Joe Biden is mentally declining, when he had an opportunity to tell the truth, he really wasn't so forward about what was happening to Joe Biden or his real thoughts on Joe Biden, which again, he claims that, you know, he was trying to give hints that Joe Biden was mentally declining, but I really don't think so.
Chuck, let's talk about the politics of this. Some of the language in this report is just damning. You can't get around it. An elderly man with a poor memory, he's in the fight of his political life.
Well, and it's also, when is it coming, right? It's coming on the heels of just like more of these. And he's accumulating. This is sort of a narrative that is the classic death by a thousand cuts, right? You know, the Cole and the Helmut Kohl and the Francois Mitterrand. And it's these tiny little things, and every moment, of course, gets amplified by the right-wing noise machine. And it certainly does. And you're seeing with this in this report. There's an easy way, though, for the White House to basically make this report pointless about his memory.
Which is?
Put them out there.
Yeah.
Let's see
will
it.
they?
Put them out there all the time. The easiest way to get rid of this storyline is to get them out there.
Right.
But it's been discussed. He has not informed the nation about why we've struck so many military sites in the Middle East, right? We've had paper statements and occasional comment here or there. We had a daytime one so far about the border bill, but he's been not very engaged on that. He's engaged in these fundraisers.
Yeah.
Which we get
Behind closed doors.
behind where there's no cameras.
Yeah.
But, I don't know how many different ways people can be yelling into the vacuum to this White House. You got to get them out there more, because the public is drawing their own conclusion.
Yeah.
And then this report feeds a narrative. They may be angry about it. They may think, oh, this Trump appointee put that in there to, scare us in the same way Clinton people were upset about the words James Comey used when he made the statement after deciding not to bring charges against her. And so, but it doesn't erase, it's sort of like say there, well, why are you worried about it? Because there's some truth to it. You know that the voters are seeing this. You've got to fix this. Is it fixable? We're going to find out.
So when I told this story about 6 months ago, I had a cabinet secretary, very off the record, okay, cabinet secretary, right after the 22 midterms, ask me this question. How can Biden run again? Okay, this is a pretty high level. This cabinet secretary could never get a one-on-one in the Oval Office. Felt as if they were being prevented. This was not, no offense to HUD and labor, but this person wasn't at HUD and labor. And I'll just leave it at that. This is one of the big five. And they couldn't get a one-on-one meeting with her. I believe Blinken was the only one that ever got real one-on-one meetings. I don't think anybody else did, and it's because Blinken was in on it. And what do I mean by in on it? You know, this is where I'm going to defend the press a little bit here, because I would argue, why did the country conclude that Biden was too old to be president? Because of what they saw based on the coverage we were giving. So, for instance, while we had Baghdad Bob-like spokespeople inside that West Wing about Biden, oh, he's never been better, he's never been this. You know, it was us in the press who said, hey, look, he's taking the short staircase. It was us in the press that said, hey, he's only doing one event a day.
Well, I mean, in fairness, you got a former colleague of yours looked in the camera and told the audience, F you, if you don't believe this is the best version
and this is why I'm not going to sit there and defend that.
Right.
There was a lot of what I call the partisan, the ideologic. Look, the people that are on cable news.
But you should. The media should.
But my argument is that the reason the public had concluded Biden was too old was based on their own observations. Well, how were they observing this? Well, we were the filters.
Yeah, so Chuck Todd is essentially arguing that, well, it's not our fault that we covered up Joe Biden's mental decline because Democrats were lying to us, right? Even though he has admitted in prior interviews that he was told by officials basically that there's an issue, right? That, hey, how can Joe Biden continue to run and that there's a cover-up going on, right? I mean, like, come on. Where there's smoke, there's fire. The media decided that they're not going to investigate the smoke, right? But they're going to say, hey, there's smoke, but they're not going to actually investigate the smoke. They're not going to tell the American people that they believe there's a cover-up going on. They're not going to thoroughly question Democrats and hold them accountable for covering up Biden's mental condition, right? But at the same time, they don't want to be criticized for not doing that, right? They want to give themselves pats on the back for saying, well, we hinted at it. Well, we said that Biden's not doing as many interviews as he should, or that, you know, he's not as public as he should, which that is essentially what the criticism was from Chuck Todd, as you guys saw. However, notice how he frames the criticism. Well, the criticism is right-wing narrative, right? The right-wing media, they're echoing this. But the reason why they throw right-wing media in there, okay, is to discredit it while at the same time being somewhat honest about the fact that, hey, yeah, Biden is definitely not doing the interviews that he should be doing, right? That there are issues here, but that's right-wing narrative, right? That's the right-wing narrative, okay? So again, I know the game that these people play, the tricks that they play, because ultimately Chuck Todd even admitted himself that there were people, his colleagues, felt like actually doing journalism, okay, when it comes to covering Democrats, helps Trump. This is why they didn't want to do any journalism when it comes to Democrats, because ultimately they saw that as, well, it helps Trump to cover the negative parts of the Democrat Party, which is a cover-up, because they're essentially admitting they knew there was smoke, but they just decided not to investigate the smoke because they didn't want to find the fire, right? That is essentially what's going on here. So let's listen to another fired liberal media anchor. This guy, Chris Cillizza, used to work for CNN. He also is upset about the fact that the media is getting backlash for covering up Biden's mental decline.
I think what happened here is a couple things. So, number one, people say to me all the time, of course it was a cover-up by the media. Just look at Joe Biden. Of course he was out of it. And to that I would say, there is and there should be a much higher bar for a media outlet or a reporter to say that Joe Biden is clearly mentally slower or incapacitated than it is for someone to just say, he has dementia, he has Parkinson's. You can say that. But for the media to report that, it's a very high bar.
Yeah, but see, here's the problem. If President Trump was going through what Biden was going through, right? If it was so clear that President Trump was cognitively declining. In fact, they tried to do this during the campaign, right? They actually tried to do this during the campaign. They tried to put it out there that President Trump is cognitively declining, okay, as a way to try to boost Kamala Harris over Trump, right? To try to reverse the whole Biden thing, right? So again, if President Trump actually was cognitively declining like Joe Biden and was showing signs of it, these people would be covering 24/7, right? There wouldn't be a high bar, just like there's not a high bar for these people to essentially compare President Trump to Hitler, right? So don't sit here and try to tell me how, well, the bar is high for us to definitively say that Biden's cognitively declining, right? No. The bar is only high because you want to defend Democrats. The bar is never that high when it comes to defending President Trump, right? But all of a sudden, the bar is high when it comes to Biden. Again, these people make me sick. They make me so sick.
I don't think that bar was met. So yes, when I watched Joe Biden, the eye test made me think, as I watched him, man, he has really slowed down. And I'm not sure he should run for a second term. It did not make me think, man, he definitely, something is really wrong with him, and I'm going to cover it up so that he can win. No, absolutely not. But I will also add this. That does not, the fact that I do not believe there was any coordinated cover-up by the media of Joe Biden's condition, that does not get us media off the hook, and here's why. I made a video about this before. You can look at it. It's called My Apology for My Joe Biden Coverage. The media should have asked more questions about Joe Biden. I should have asked more questions about Joe Biden and his health. We should have dug harder. Because the eye test was what it was, and he looked old and frail, and when he was in public, he would sometimes lose his train of thought, we should have done more reporting. Now, people did. Alex Thompson at Axios did some. The Wall Street Journal political staff did some. People here and there wrote consistently and clearly that maybe he's too old. I tried to talk about his age fairly frequently, but I should have talked about it more and I should have asked more questions. And then you get to the why of that. Why didn't you ask more questions? And I'm not speaking for all of the media because all the media is a vast thing. But here's what I would say. Any study that you ever see about who reporters vote for, they vote for Democrats much more than Republicans. And I think what was going on here is I think it was an inherent and sort of unconscious bias more than a conscious bias. But I think the reporters covering this White House were too willing to take the Biden team's word for it.
So, AKA, what this dude is saying is that, well, it wasn't a coordinated cover-up. It was an unconscious cover-up in the sense that because the liberal media is biased, this is why we call the media the liberal media, right? Because they're liberal, they're biased towards liberals, the Democrat Party, because of their bias, because of their political bias. This dude's admitting that, again, because the media is liberal, they decided that it would be a good idea not to investigate the smoke, right? Coming from the White House, right? They say, you know what? We're not going to really focus on that. Instead, we'll focus more on Trump because of their political ideology. So what this dude is admitting, who is a so-called journalist, he's admitting that the political bias of the media affects how they cover stories. That is what he's saying, which is not a right-wing conspiracy theory, right? It's not a right-wing conspiracy theory because they're admitting it out loud. They're telling you, yes, because we are liberal, right? Because we vote Democrat, because we want Democrats to win, that affects the way that we cover stories. And that is everything wrong with the media, right? This is why these individuals are unemployed, right? This is why you have the faith in the media at an all-time low, because these people openly lie to boost the political party that they want to win. And he's admitted it. He's literally admitting it right now.
Anytime you asked about Joe Biden, they would say, well, I mean, he's 80, he moves a little bit more stiffly than he did before, but man, he is totally with it. He outworks our 20-something staffers. And I think people, reporters, were too willing to just say, okay, that makes sense. They
would never accept that from the Trump administration, right? They would never accept it, okay? They would be digging deeper, deeper, deeper. They would never let it go. I mean, we're currently witnessing how the media is covering the Trump administration. Did they ever cover the Biden administration as critically as they're covering the Trump administration right now? These people keep talking about how there's going to be a recession. There's going to be a recession. There's going to be a recession, right? But under Biden, they literally changed the definition of a recession. When we went into a actual recession, they changed the definition and said, nah, that's not a real recession. Now, all of a sudden, they want to talk about a recession. Now, all of a sudden, they want to acknowledge inflation. Again, it's absolutely incredible. And this is why I try to tell you guys, I don't know why people all of a sudden now are believing in the liberal media, because they are covering stories based off their political bias, right? They're reporting based off their political bias. So I don't understand why is it that people now all of a sudden are believing the media when it comes to a lot of stuff they're reporting, because they're already admitting when it comes to this Joe Biden story that, yeah, they messed up because they were, quote unquote, too willing to believe Democrats, AKA they don't want to cover Democrats negatively. They don't want to say anything negative about Democrats. They only want to try to hurt Trump.
Too credulous. They didn't ask enough questions. Their skepticism meter was not turned up high enough. And I think that had it been a Republican in that office, particularly if that Republican had been Donald Trump, there would have been less credulity. There would have been less willingness to just go along with what the Trump White House was saying. Like, oh, he's fine. You don't see him in his great times. He's amazing. I think there would have been more hard questions asked. And I think there should have been more hard questions asked by the media of Joe Biden and Joe Biden's staff about his health. I absolutely think that's true.
Yeah. So basically, yeah, this is one of the propagandists admitting that, yeah. The liberal media is nothing but straight anti-Trump, pro-Democrat propaganda, right? And that, again, these reporters are so biased, consciously or unconsciously. Either way, big problem, right? They are so biased that, again, it affects how they report. Like a story, probably the biggest story of 2024 was Biden's mental decline, right? One of the biggest stories. We have a sitting president who was not cognitively capable of being in office. He was there, and we had reports from the DOJ showing that this dude is not even capable of standing trial, right? It would be elder abuse, okay? That's how much this man was declining, and the media try to pretend as if there's no issues, there's no problems, right? That all of the reports about Joe Biden's cognitive decline were just, well, it's just right-wing narrative, right? Just right-wing conspiracy theories, cheap fakes, and then they want to pat themselves on the back, and they want to make money selling books, admitting the truth after they lied to the American people. It's despicable stuff. It really is. And then they want to get mad because the American people are criticizing them. They're getting backlash for the lies and the cover-up. These people think that they're above all criticism. They really do. They believe that they are the arbiters of truth, and that even when they're caught lying, oh no, you can't criticize us for lying. You can't say we lied. It's the Democrats' fault. They lied to us, right? And we just made the mistake of believing their lies. But you believed their lies because you wanted to believe their lies. Not because you didn't know they were lying. You knew they were lying, but because you wanted to believe their lies in order to affect the outcome of the election. You failed to engage in your job, which is journalism, and to report the truth to the American people. And again, these people wonder why nobody respects journalism anymore, and why the ratings of the liberal media, right, the approval of the media is at an all-time low, along with the Democrat Party. So let me know what you guys think. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. Most importantly, share a Black conservative perspective. Peace.